A place where radar towers stared at the Atlantic, experiments whispered about bending time itself, and the official story somehow never quite added up. Now imagine this happened before Epstein, before the phrase "secret island" entered the public vocabulary. Tonight, we investigate a story that refuses to stay buried. The Montauk Project. And the question is simple, but unsettling. What were they really doing at Camp Hero? Before we talk about time travel, portals, or shadowy experiments, we need to talk about something very real. Because Montauk isn't a legend. It's a place you can visit. Today. Montauk Point sits at the far eastern edge of Long Island, where the land simply gives up and the Atlantic takes over. The wind is relentless. The ocean is loud. And at night, it feels isolated in a way that makes your thoughts sound louder than they should. In the middle of all that, concrete bunkers, rusting fences, and a massive radar tower that still looks like it's watching something. This was Camp Hero. Built during World War II, Camp Hero was designed as a coastal defense fortress. Thick concrete walls, underground tunnels, gun emplacements facing the sea. By the 1950s, it was repurposed for a new enemy, one that didn't arrive by boat. The Cold War. By the early 1960s, the site became Montauk Air Force Station, officially tasked with long-range radar surveillance. Its job: detect incoming Soviet bombers before they reached New York City. Totally reasonable. Totally necessary. Totally not suspicious, at first. But then locals started noticing things that didn't line up. The radar dish rotated even when the base was supposedly inactive. Power outages rolled through nearby neighborhoods, always at night. And military trucks came and went with no visible markings. People who worked nearby said they were warned not to ask questions. Fishermen claimed their radios filled with strange interference when passing offshore. And hikers reported humming sounds beneath their feet, as if the ground itself was alive. Now, to be fair, Cold War bases were secretive by nature. But Montauk felt different. Former employees later described entire sections of the base they were never allowed to enter. No signs. No labels. Just locked steel doors leading underground. One civilian contractor reportedly joked, "I was cleared for radar, but not for whatever the hell was below us." Short pause. And that's the thing. When a military base refuses to explain what it's doing, people start explaining it themselves. That's when the rumors began. Not of weapons. Not of spies. But of experiments that had nothing to do with enemy aircraft. And everything to do with the human mind. Low, unsettling music fades in. And this is where Montauk stops being just another Cold War relic. And starts becoming something else entirely. This is usually the point in the story where people lean in and lower their voices. Because whatever Montauk was, it wasn't just a radar station anymore. By the early 1970s, rumors started circulating among locals, former workers, and the occasional person who probably shouldn't have been talking at all. And the strange part? These stories didn't come from one place. They surfaced independently. Different people. Different years. Same unsettling themes. Underground levels that didn't appear on blueprints. Entire shifts staffed by personnel with no visible insignia. And civilians, yes, civilians, being escorted onto the base under armed guard. One former maintenance worker later claimed he was ordered to repair wiring in a sealed corridor he'd never seen before. No windows. No markings. Just fluorescent lights and a sound he described as a constant electrical hum that felt like it was inside your skull. He said the guards wouldn't answer questions. Wouldn't make eye contact. Which is never comforting. And then there were the children. Multiple accounts, always vague, always disturbing, mention young test subjects brought in from outside the base. According to one alleged security guard, they were told the kids were part of a behavioral study. No names. No records. Just numbers. Now, before alarms start going off. Yes, these stories are unverified. Yes, memories fade. Yes, Cold War paranoia was very real. But here's what makes Montauk different. In the late 1980s, a man claiming to be a former project engineer released fragments of what he called a leaked internal summary. The document referenced Project Pegasus and described experiments involving electromagnetic influence on human cognition and temporal perception distortion. Not time travel, yet. Just the idea that time could be experienced differently. Which, by the way, is a terrifying concept all on its own. Brief pause. The document also mentioned side effects. Disorientation. Memory loss. Nightmares that felt more like flashbacks. One chilling line stood out to researchers. Subject unable to determine present moment with certainty. Read that again. And then ask yourself. Why would a radar station need to study that? According to some insiders, Montauk wasn't operating in isolation. It was allegedly connected to earlier programs like MKUltra, where mind control experiments were once dismissed as fantasy, until congressional hearings proved otherwise. So when someone says Montauk was just a conspiracy theory, critics respond with a very uncomfortable reminder. The US government has already admitted to doing things we once swore were impossible. Low, uneasy music fades in. And if even half of these whispers are true, then Montauk wasn't watching the skies. It was watching the human mind. And possibly, what happens when you push it too far? This is the moment in the story where the rumors stop feeling abstract. Because according to multiple insider accounts, Montauk wasn't just studying the human mind. It was testing it. By the early 1970s, the heart of the operation allegedly moved underground. Beneath the radar towers and concrete bunkers were levels most personnel never saw. These weren't improvised tunnels, they were purpose-built. Reinforced walls. Heavy shielding. Rooms designed to contain something unpredictable. At the center of it all was the radar dish itself. Not just a detection system, but, according to former technicians, a transmission amplifier. The theory goes like this: electromagnetic signals were combined with psychological conditioning to influence perception, and eventually, reality. Some insiders referred to it as the chair. A metal seat mounted with electrodes. Head restraints. Monitors tracking brain activity in real time. Subjects were placed inside and exposed to intense electromagnetic fields while guided through hypnosis. The stated goal: enhanced cognition. Remote viewing. Psychological resilience. The unofficial goal: to see how far the human mind could be pushed before it broke. Dramatic beat. One former engineer described a night in 1971 when the system was pushed past its limits. It was raining. Hard. Wind rattled the radar tower like it was alive. Technicians were ordered to increase power levels beyond approved thresholds. Alarms sounded almost immediately. Oscilloscopes spiked. And several workers reported a sensation of pressure, like their thoughts were being squeezed. Then, according to multiple versions of the story, something happened. A visual distortion appeared inside the chamber. Not light. Not shadow. More like a ripple. A tear. A moment where the room didn't quite agree with itself. Some say a figure appeared. Others say it was a projection from a subject's mind. One technician quit the next morning and never spoke publicly again. Silence, then low hum resumes. After that night, reports claim the experiments changed. Focus shifted from cognition to time perception. Subjects described losing hours. Others insisted they experienced events that hadn't happened yet. A few reportedly asked the same questions over and over, convinced they were out of sync. One alleged memo described a test subject who believed he'd been in the facility for years, despite only being there for days. And then there's the most disturbing claim. According to a supposed insider, one subject never came back. No record. No explanation. Just a line in a logbook that read, "Temporal displacement, unresolved." Dramatic music rises, then cuts. Now, let's be clear. There is no physical evidence confirming any of this. No surviving machines. No verified documents. Just testimonies, and a facility that was quietly shut down soon after. But here's the part that keeps researchers awake at night. The US military officially acknowledged experimenting with remote viewing in the same era. Psychological warfare was real. Human experimentation happened. So when people ask, could Montauk have gone too far? The uncomfortable answer is, we already know they sometimes did. Low music fades. And if these experiments failed, the question becomes, what happens to the people who were part of them? Now this is where the story takes a turn. Because Montauk doesn't exist in a vacuum. In the early 1970s, around the same time the most disturbing Montauk stories are set, another place was operating quietly, far from Long Island. North Fox Island. A private island in Lake Michigan. Remote. Isolated. Forgettable, by design. Officially, it was owned by a charitable foundation. Unofficially, it became the center of one of the darkest abuse scandals in American history, exposed years later and then, strangely forgotten. Children were flown in. Records were incomplete. And powerful people were never fully named. Sound familiar? Now, let's be very clear before we go any further. There is no document proving Montauk and North Fox Island were directly linked. No signed memo. No smoking gun. But investigators, journalists, and researchers have noticed something unsettling. The patterns overlap. Remote locations. Restricted access. Psychological experimentation. And institutions that failed, spectacularly, to protect the vulnerable. Some researchers believe North Fox Island functioned as a feeder system, a place where victims were broken down psychologically before being moved elsewhere for further experimentation. Others argue it was part of a broader Cold War-era network focused on studying trauma, control, and compliance. And then there's the most chilling theory of all. That these locations weren't just about abuse or secrecy, but about how trauma alters the human mind. Which brings us right back to Montauk. Because if you wanted to test the limits of perception, if you wanted to see how the mind reacts under extreme stress, you wouldn't start with volunteers. Quiet, uneasy pause. Several alleged Montauk insiders later claimed that some test subjects arrived already traumatized. Quiet. Dissociated. Easily manipulated. No names were used. Only numbers. And when these subjects were gone, no one asked questions. North Fox Island was eventually exposed in the late 1970s. Montauk Air Force Station was shut down not long after. Coincidence? Maybe. But history has taught us something important. Large-scale abuse doesn't survive on monsters alone. It survives on silence, bureaucracy, and the assumption that someone else is paying attention. And when powerful systems operate in the dark, they don't just hide mistakes. They hide people. Low, somber music fades in. So when we ask whether Montauk crossed a line, we're really asking something bigger. How many places like this existed? How many stories never surfaced? And how many were buried under the label of national security? Because before Epstein, before we had the language to talk about institutional abuse, there was North Fox Island. And Montauk. And a Cold War willing to justify almost anything. By the early 1980s, Montauk Air Force Station was finished. At least, officially. In 1981, the base was abruptly decommissioned. No long farewell. No public explanation. One day it was active. The next, it wasn't. The reason given was budget cuts and obsolete radar technology. Which sounds reasonable. Until you look a little closer. Former employees later recalled being told to clear out with almost no notice. Equipment was removed at night. Trucks rolled in after dark and left before sunrise. Certain areas, particularly underground sections, were completely sealed. Concrete poured. Steel doors welded shut. One former worker claimed entire rooms were filled in and erased from the layout entirely, as if someone wanted to make sure no one could ever go back and check. And then, silence. No follow-up reports. No investigations. No curiosity from anyone with authority. Which is strange, because if Montauk truly was just a radar station, there would have been nothing to hide. Soft wind ambience fades in. Today, the site still stands, but it's been transformed. Camp Hero State Park. Families picnic where guard towers once stood. Cyclists ride past bunkers thick enough to survive a direct hit. Tourists photograph the massive radar tower, usually without realizing it was never dismantled. And here's the detail that unsettles researchers the most. That radar tower was never removed. Most Cold War installations were stripped down or demolished. Montauk's centerpiece remains, looming over the coastline like a relic someone forgot, or chose, not to erase. Visitors report strange sensations near certain buildings. Headaches. Dizziness. A faint humming sound on quiet days. Scientists say it's environmental. Skeptics say it's imagination. But those who've studied Montauk closely will tell you this. Places remember things. Not literally, of course, but culturally. Psychologically. A site where secrets lived tends to attract questions long after the locks are gone. And Montauk attracts a lot of them. Former insiders rarely speak publicly. Those who do often hedge their words. Memories are fuzzy. Details contradict. And that, ironically, only deepens the mystery. Because if nothing happened, there would be nothing to forget. Pause. No documents have ever surfaced confirming time travel. No official admissions of illegal experiments. Just fragments. Testimonies. And a shutdown that came too fast and explained too little. Which leaves us standing here. On a windswept bluff. Looking at a place that refuses to fully explain itself. And maybe that's the point. Because sometimes the most unsettling part of history isn't what we can prove. It's what was important enough to bury. Low, reflective music fades. So now we're standing at the end of the story. No portals opening in front of us. No declassified file sliding across the table at the last second. Just questions. And maybe that's the most honest place a story like this can leave us. Because when we strip Montauk down to its bones, we're left with two competing realities. On one side, a former Air Force base, built for war, operating during the most paranoid era in modern history. A place where secrecy was routine and silence was policy. On the other, decades of testimony. Patterns that repeat across different locations. Programs once labeled conspiracies that we now know were very real. Mind control experiments existed. Human testing happened. Trauma was weaponized. Those aren't theories. They're documented history. So when people ask, did the Montauk Project really involve time travel? The honest answer is, we don't know. There's no proof that anyone stepped through time. No verified evidence that reality itself was bent. But there is evidence that powerful institutions pushed boundaries. And didn't always stop when they should have. Which raises a quieter, more unsettling question. What if Montauk wasn't about traveling through time? but about seeing how much of a human being could be taken away before something broke. Soft pause. It's tempting to dismiss stories like this as folklore, as exaggeration, as paranoia left over from the Cold War. But history has a habit of humbling us. Every generation has at least one moment where it looks back and says, they knew, and they let it happen. So maybe Montauk is a warning more than a mystery. A reminder that secrecy doesn't just hide technology. It hides people. It hides decisions. And sometimes, it hides consequences. And if that's true, then the real danger isn't what happened at Montauk. It's the idea that places like it could exist again. Quietly. Legally. And just out of sight. Wind over ocean returns. So we leave you with the same question investigators still ask today. Was the Montauk Project a failed experiment in time itself? Or was it simply a mirror, reflecting what happens when fear, power, and silence collide? Either way, history isn't done with this story yet. And neither should we be. Stay curious. Stay skeptical. And we'll see you in the next investigation. Whether Montauk was a failed time experiment, a psychological warfare lab, or just the most misunderstood radar station in America. One thing is certain. The Cold War left scars we're still uncovering. And some places, some stories, refuse to stay silent. If you enjoyed this investigation, stay curious, stay skeptical, and I'll see you in the next mystery. Because history is always stranger than fiction.